You're listening to Jessica's story, a son with autism, on the Child Life On Call podcast. Hi, and welcome to the Child Life On Call podcast. When your child is sick, the whole world seems to stop in its tracks. Plans and priorities change, and your number one job becomes figuring out how to get your child well again. For some of us, rest, medications, and relaxation can do the trick. But for others, it takes more. It takes countless doctor appointments, invasive medical testing, therapies, surgeries. The list goes on. And then you still may not have all of the answers or results you were hoping for. This podcast features parents of children that have an illness or medical condition and gives them a place to share their own journeys and experiences. We will talk about the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, but one thing seems to remain the same. Children are resilient and teach us more about ourselves and the world than we could ever imagine. Thank you so much for lending a listening ear and opening up your heart to these families and this podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor. Hello, everyone, and happy pandemic to you. I don't know if that really lands, but acting like this is just a regular week doesn't quite feel right either. So, future listeners, sorry in advance for all of the COVID-19 talk that's coming from all of us podcasters. It's really hard not to discuss it in this crazy world, but I am so glad that I've been able to keep up with you, so many of you, on social media these days, on Instagram and Facebook, and it's been great to connect with new parents and child life students and specialists and other nonprofits that benefit kiddos with medical and special needs. And speaking of connecting, I am lucky enough today to introduce you to Jessica. She is actually an adult clinical neuropsychologist, mother of two, and fellow podcaster. She and her husband have a show called Thriving in the Midst of Chaos. And man, I feel like that is the perfect title and something we can actually all relate to right now. Their podcast covers all things special needs parenting and is full of so many resources and powerful stories. She covers pretty much any topic you can think of, from homeschooling to IEPs, raising twins with special needs, financial considerations, and so much more. So go and listen after you hear her personal story today. I also want to point out to you that Jessica and her husband use pseudonyms for their children and don't post pictures of them. And I think that is such a cool way to go about sharing their story with the world in a way that makes them feel comfortable. Listen all the way to the end of the episode so you can find out how to follow along and connect with Jessica and her podcast. Here we go.
Sure. My name is Jessica Temple. My family and I are from Maryland, or we've actually bounced around to a bunch of different places, but we have been in Maryland for about 2 years now. I'm married to my husband, Lewis, for the last 6 or so years, and actually it's almost 7. And we have 2 children. Benji is 4, and Alex is actually 21 months old now.
It's so funny because we talked about this a little bit, but we have kiddos right at the same age. And then Preston and I have also been married for 6 years, and we met in the DC area close to Maryland. So it's
oh, wow.
Our lives are pretty parallel. That's interesting.
I find in the special needs world that there are so many similarities, and it's really a small world.
It is. And so you've got 2 kiddos with special needs, and tell us about who we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, so Benji and Alex both have special needs. Just briefly, Alex was born early and ended up having a perinatal stroke, but it's very similar to one of your other guests. So we're actually going to talk about Benji, who is my 4-year-old who has autism.
Okay. Gotcha. And I think we talked about this, and I think it might be Alex's episode from a few back, and just a lot of similarities there. So it would be interesting to have you guys connect at some point.
Yeah.
But let's start with Benji and just kind of talk to us about the time leading up to, I guess, his whole process with discovering that he was on the spectrum.
Sure. So he wasn't diagnosed until he was about 3. So I'm a neuropsychologist by trade, so I have had to study everything related to the brain in both children and adults in order to get board certified in neuropsychology. So when Benji was very young, I would say 6 to 8 weeks maybe, I did start noticing some small signs that something was different. And having very recently gotten my board certification, or I think I might have actually been studying for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was studying for it, and I was reading the child chapter, and then he was born like 6 weeks later. And so I started noticing these little signs throughout very young childhood where he wouldn't really be excited to see me, or he wouldn't show us toys. He wouldn't try to engage with us or point to things to show us what he was looking at. He wouldn't like grab our hand and do stuff. There were just little signs that something was different. And I just tucked that away in the back of my head because this was my first child and I only work with adults. So I didn't really have much experience with very young children who have autism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've worked in the past with 6 to 10-year-olds who have autism, but again, that's very different from a baby. So I saw these little signs and I knew what it could mean, but the doctors really didn't have any concern. So I remember at about 10 months old, he was going for his 9 or 10 month checkup, and the doctor we saw at the time was really getting along with him. He was so sweet and giving really good eye contact. Mm-hmm. And he's always been a flirt. Mm-hmm. So he was flirting with her. And she looked at him and she said in this type of voice, "You don't have autism, do you?" Oh. So I thought to myself, well, okay. I mean, I trust her. I liked her very much. And I still do as a doctor, even though we're in a different state now, so we don't see her. But I said, well, I thought to myself, well, if she doesn't have any concerns, then maybe I shouldn't either. Right. But he was delayed in pretty much everything. So he started rolling over a little bit late. He started crawling at about 10 months. He was late to sit up and things like that. And he also started to walk at about 15 months. So not super late, not really abnormal, but something again to keep an eye on. But the doctors were saying, well, it's probably fine. My favorite one is, well, they have the bell curve. Everyone needs to be on some part of the bell curve. So some people have to be late. Some people have to be early. Okay. So that's a thing to say.
Yeah. So, interesting.
Yeah. We don't see him anymore.
No.
I did not feel that he was a good fit. And even after we got the diagnosis for Benji of autism, he still said he didn't believe it. So it was not. Oh
my gosh.
It was not productive. It was not helpful. He asked the 3 questions of, is he talking? Is he giving you eye contact? Does he talk to people? I'm like, that's not a diagnosis. So right. Anyway, before I get too far off track, so the doctors thought everything was fine, but the biggest delay was that he didn't start saying really anything until about 18 months. So the doctor wasn't really concerned because I brought up the concern at about 14 or 15 months because they should start like babbling or saying things. Yeah. And he was saying some sounds, but no actual words.
Okay.
Except for maybe mama. So she said, usually people don't get assessed by early intervention until about 18 months. I said, I'll call now. So he was assessed somewhere around 16 months. And the problem was they don't have a lot of expectations for very, very young children with speech. So he was not delayed enough to obtain services at that time or get any form of diagnosis. And they gave us a lot of really great suggestions as to what to do at home, like repeating words and really doing a lot of reading with him. So we did that. In about 18 months, he did start talking. And then the doctors weren't concerned because his speech really took off. So we still noticed all those different subtle signs, and he was much more hyperactive than all the children, but they still weren't concerned. And he just had some unusual interactions with people, but doctors, again, weren't concerned. So we moved to Maryland when he was a little over 2, and he started a new school, of course. And a few months in, they had a lot of parent-teacher conferences with us because his behavior was starting to really decline. So he was starting to get very aggressive. He wasn't participating in groups. He wouldn't listen or pay attention, like he wouldn't follow directions. He wouldn't pay attention to, excuse me, what was going on in the classroom. And the aggression got to the point where they were scared for the other children. So they called a meeting and said, if you don't get your son tested for autism, he cannot stay here anymore. And actually at that point, they had cut down his full day program to a half a day because after 1:00, they said they couldn't manage without a one-to-one aide. So we were actually having to cut out of work pretty early because we needed somewhere for him to go.
Right.
And at that point, he didn't have any services or any diagnosis. So we started to try to get him tested because after they mentioned autism, it really clicked with me that, yeah, those are the signs that I'm seeing. I am on board. So we got early intervention to evaluate him, but they weren't able to provide any sort of diagnosis. And it was unfortunately not a great experience because they did a very, very brief evaluation because he wouldn't participate. And their conclusion was, well, if he had participated, we think that he likely would have done really well, so he doesn't meet criteria for services. So
that doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't. It was so funny because, he passed the PT and OT evaluation, what minimal things that he did. And I think what they did was observation for those, just seeing how he played by himself and moved around without doing a formal observation.
Right.
I mean, a formal evaluation. And then speech therapy. She did try to do an evaluation, but he wouldn't participate. And she said, he's talking to his mom a little bit. He's fine. So I didn't really think much about that. So I decided to do private testing because we weren't able to obtain any services or any help. And the school said if he didn't have an aide in school, he then could not stay at that school. And we really liked the school, so we wanted him to stay there. Unfortunately, it didn't work out with that school, and that's fine. It just wasn't the right fit for him. So we went down the road of getting him tested. The problem is, in the autism world, it's very, very, very difficult to get a child tested in a timely fashion. If you're very lucky, you can get the testing done within 6 months, but oftentimes it's 12 to 24 months. So I called a lot of places around the major metropolitan city that I'm living in, and they were booked for a very, very long time. Just to give you any indication, the biggest one that most people try to go to around here, I called to put myself on the waiting list for Benji in October 2018, and it is now April of 2020, and we still have not gotten the call from them yet.
Oh,
so
my goodness.
Had we waited, we would have been out almost like a year and a half of services.
And that's just alarming because you were in the middle of so many opportunities and so many options.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
That's the problem. Time is really of the essence when it comes to autism.
Right.
You don't want to wait for years and years. A month is okay if you need to, but the sooner you get services, the better off your child will be. So waiting that long was not an option for me. And just to back up, so Alex was born 3 months after we moved to Maryland, and I ended up having to have him because I had severe preeclampsia, like very, very, very bad at 35 weeks. So they had to rush me to the hospital and induce me, but my blood pressure never really came down very well. And part of that was we knew something was going on with Alex, but we also knew we were having all these issues with Benji and his school. So my blood pressure was through the roof.
I'm sure.
And
and
I decided the number one thing that is causing my blood pressure to go up is not knowing what is going on with Benji. At that point, I honestly said to myself, I don't really care what the diagnosis is, if it's behavioral, if it's autism, if it's something else, but I need to know what it is.
Right.
So I talked to everyone I could, and my best friend works in New York, and she has a clinic assessing people for intellectual disabilities and autism. So she was able to pull strings for me to get us in within 6 months, which was amazing. So We did have to pay out of pocket, but it was very much worth it to lower my blood pressure.
Right.
And we were also lucky enough because she had pull enough and high stakes, and, she's my best friend, and it was essentially her nephew,
Right.
to get the results back quickly, because sometimes it can take 2 or 3 months to get the results, and she got it back within 2 weeks.
So was it a
So
similar testing process with this private group than it was in the other thing that you were in or considering?
no,
Okay.
no. So early intervention, I don't know how it is for everyone. And I'm from what I've heard in other podcasts, different states and even counties do things differently, and they did very minimal testing. It was mostly observation for Benji. But the testing that Benji had in New York, they did some psychological testing, which mostly was the ADOS, which is the main gold standard diagnostic test for autism. They looked at his adaptive behaviors. So was he going to the bathroom? Was he dressing himself? Was he asking for help when he needed it? Those kinds of things. And they also did a interview questionnaire about different types of autism symptoms. So that was the psychological portion. And they also did cognitive testing, where they did, I believe it was the Stanford Binet, which is one of the main, I would say, 3 intelligence tests or IQ tests. And it really looks at working memory. So can you get some information in, do something with it, and give it back out? So for adults, it would be like mental arithmetic. They do language, they do visual skills, and they do thinking speed is essentially the main things I believe they do. They look at. So they really used that to see where he was. And so that really gave us the information that he did have autism.
It
And
sounds
interestingly,
very comprehensive
it
and
is, and I really
intense.
appreciated that.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was interesting because they were saying, we couldn't get terribly much because he wouldn't participate. But for me, in that case, it wasn't, oh, I'm sure he's doing fine. It was really more diagnostic of all these other things are going on. He's too overwhelmed. He can't sustain his attention. This is kind of scary for him. And it was helping the diagnostic process of finding out what's going on instead of, oh, I'm sure he'd be doing fine. He just doesn't want to do it.
Right.
It was really more to it.
Right.
We also, once we got that diagnosis, it finally opened up doors to get treatment. And so because luckily our insurance was good enough that we were able, without a referral, to get evaluations for physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And at that time, he was a little over 3. So it was about 2 months after his 3rd birthday. And he ended up needing physical therapy and occupational therapy, which he did from, I want to say, May of last year to January of this year. And he did an evaluation for speech therapy as well, but he didn't really need any services. He also did feeding therapy because he wouldn't eat anything other than Chobani key lime yogurt and Pediasure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of sugar. So we did those kinds of evaluations to really get a good picture as to what was going on. And it was really interesting. Like I said, I've listened to a lot of other podcasts that talk about autism and people getting diagnoses and things like that. And my experience, I think because of where I just was in life, was very different than most people. What I've heard from most people is that they're really devastated, they're really upset. And for me, I felt relieved and validated because family and some friends had told me, well, it's just bad parenting that's causing these behaviors, when I've got a lot of training. Like, I'm not a perfect parent, but I'm not a bad parent.
Right.
I can tell you that.
Well,
and not to toot my own horn, but like, I was trying everything to help my son at home. And, it was validating that he had the diagnosis that I thought he had. It wasn't bad parenting. It was more than that. And, it was relief that finally we know what's going on so we can actually do something about it. Unfortunately, I still haven't really had time to grieve because Alex was just born, and of course we had to plow through with the testing, the treatments, then we had to get an IEP and school placement and all that stuff. So still haven't grieved yet, but he's making progress,
Uh,
so that's really helpful. Yeah, and that's one of the other things is he is what they call high functioning with autism, which a lot of people have trouble with that name, but essentially it means that he likely will have a good outcome with the proper treatment. So he's so that's really good. He is verbal. He is able to do some things on his own, but because of the autism, he does have some delays.
okay, I see. And I'm just kind of thinking back to when you went to New York, and were you interactive with him while he was having this testing done? Did they allow you in the room? Can you talk a little bit about what that would be like for a
Yeah,
parent?
sure. So for the intellectual portion, the IQ test, they did not allow me in, and for a few different reasons. One is that it really changes the validity of the test, and also he absolutely would not have participated if I was there. So I was not allowed in for that part, which is good. But for the autism testing portion, I was allowed to be there. So two things that they did. One was the CARS, which is the interview questionnaire about different types of symptoms with autism. So I was there answering questions, and he was there just doing his own things, so they could also get observations
Mm-hmm.
as to how he played by himself.
Okay.
And then the Vineland, which asks, does he bathe himself, or can he wash his face with a washcloth, or
Mm-hmm.
does he go to the bathroom on his own, those kinds of things. So that was also interactive. And then the ADOS is essentially, it takes about an hour for most kids, and it's sort of like a guided play, like a guided imaginative play type of thing, where they'll leave toys out for the kid and see what they do, and then they'll try to engage him or the child in certain activities like playing like tea, or like making tea, or playing with a doll, or reading a book, and seeing how they interact. Or if you show them what to do, will they then do it? And is there give and take? Are they smiling at you? Are they giving you eye contact? Are they running away? Those kinds of things. So I was allowed to be in there, but I was told to be very quiet and only engage with him if he came over to me and asked me something. And then just to do the minimal amount and let him be, because you don't really want to guide the child to do anything, because then you're not getting good information about how they actually are interacting. So it's really interesting. It's very hard not to guide them, because as a parent, that's what you want to do.
Sure. And that's what you do 99% of the day.
Right, right. But it's interesting to see your child play, because unless you are a stay-at-home parent, you don't often get to see your child in these kinds of situations, like playing with other people. So I found it really interesting
Sure.
to see what he does and how he does with other people. And interestingly enough, you, we did a research study through a major children's hospital around here to get what I call like a backup ADOS. So not necessarily a second opinion, but more of a confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And it was free through the research study. And he interacted the same exact way with all of the little games they played, from the
Wow.
one in New York to that one several months later. It was so
Wow.
interesting. Yeah.
Even after months of therapy that
Yeah.
he had been getting, he kind of reverted back to that behavior that felt normal in that
Not necessarily
situation,
that,
or
but he just interacted. It was the same
wow.
responses, the same movements. So it wasn't necessarily reverting. It was just he was being him.
Yeah. Oh
And I'm
my
like, wow,
gosh.
well, they're both clearly accurate.
Yeah.
It's almost verbatim.
So would you mind, like, when it's time for speech therapy, or I guess he's not doing speech, but when he's doing physical
Right.
therapy or OT or feeding therapy, back at the
Uh-huh.
beginning, when you guys were getting started, what worked well for him in getting him to be compliant and getting him to engage? I'm sure a good therapist is number one. And building
Yeah,
trust, but I didn't know if you had any other tips or tricks for parents as they're kind of getting started on the therapy wave.
sure. for number one, absolutely is a good therapist. We started physical therapy with somebody that Alex had, and it was a fine fit for Alex, but she didn't quite understand autism. And she's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Let's go do this. And Benji is not able to do that unless he wants to do something. He does need some buy-in,
Mm-hmm.
and he is also a perfectionist. So if he cannot do something perfectly, or perceives that he cannot do something perfectly, he will not do it, and he will have a meltdown. So for him, it was showing him very concrete steps, like, this is exactly what you do, this is how you do it, and really explain it to him and show it to him, but also in like a, hey, we're going to jump up and down, and then we're going to jump on one foot. Oh my goodness, it's going to be so much fun. Or like, oh, that's so silly. And oftentimes I would do it first so he could see how to do it, and then I would do it with him.
Okay.
And sometimes I would make it a little easier for him by like holding his hand or something like that. And we also found toys that he would want to do. So we would say, if you do this activity for a minute, then you can have 5 minutes with your toy. So kind of going back and forth, kind of like they call it a Premack principle of, you know, if it's almost like a reward system. So you do the hard thing and then you get the easy thing, or the thing that you want. So at least I think that's what it is. I've been
Yeah.
at school for a while, but that really helped. And, or like if he had to walk upstairs, we would put the toy at the top of the stairs. So he would have to go up to get it.
Okay.
So, and we would also try to make games out of things. So instead of just hopping on one foot, whoop-de-doo, we would make a game out of it or a story out of it, something like that. And then there was a lot more buy-in.
Sure.
Or we would adapt the activity to make it something he liked. So if he liked bouncing balls or throwing balls, then okay, we would stand on one foot and throw the ball, or we would get further and further away and throw the ball. So we would make the thing that we wanted to do out of what he wanted to do as well. So then he didn't really realize he was doing the thing that we wanted to do.
It's not work, it's play.
Right. And it really was effective.
Sure.
But a lot of it is getting the person who knows about the disorder and also is just a good fit personality wise, because it will not work otherwise. Because the days that I wasn't able to go because I was working, and either the babysitter was there, my mom was there, or my husband was there, he had such bad meltdowns that he eventually got discharged because they couldn't handle it anymore. So, honest to God, it was the therapist was not the right fit.
Right.
And I said, can we have one more chance with such and such therapist who was also working with Alex, because I knew her for almost a year and she just has this really bubbly personality.
Yeah.
And it was a great fit, and he did well, and he was able to finish PT and get discharged.
This isn't kind of what I told you I would ask you about, but I'm very interested in now in the world of quarantine and social distancing. How are you guys getting through your therapy sessions? Are they virtual, or are you doing them at home? What's working?
So he has been discharged from PT, OT, and feeding therapy. And
Okay.
what I didn't mention yet is after we started that, I want to say last June, we started with applied behavioral analysis, or ABA therapy, which is really the gold standard for autism. So essentially they do a really, really, really in-depth observation of the child for several days. So at home, at school, those kinds of things, to see what he does well, what he needs help with or is struggling with, what the triggers are, what tends to happen after he does a behavior. And then they make a behavior plan, and then they start to implement it, and they just try things over and over and over to help him learn and help guide him and also keep him safe. So we were doing that in the school for 3 hours a day, and then he would actually go to their clinic and do ABA therapy until 4 p.m. So from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. he was doing ABA. So now in quarantine, it's a very different story. So they tried telehealth, and 5 minutes in, he was having such a bad meltdown because he didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't even want somebody on the video.
Yeah.
So we discontinued that. They were able to provide us somebody in home, but we all have some like breathing conditions like asthma and some other things that put us at high risk. And I don't feel comfortable having somebody in the home who might be going to other homes as well.
Sure.
And I just don't know where else they're going. So we decided to hold off on that. So the one thing we are doing now is, well, three things. He has a special teacher through his IEP who is just providing us resources of activities he could do during the quarantine. I'm consulting with his county provided occupational therapist because he also had a meltdown, unfortunately, when she tried to do a Zoom meeting with him. So she's giving us strategies about different sensory things we can do and fine motor things and just ways to make him feel more comfortable during this time because he's got a significant amount of anxiety, as to most kids, I would assume. And we are meeting with the behavior therapist through his ABA person probably twice a week at this point. And we're lucky that we actually ended up having to switch ABA therapists because unfortunately there were layoffs. But the one we have now, she's also the occupational therapist who is working with Benji.
Okay.
So she can really provide him, or me rather, everything we need to provide to him because we're also working on potty training for the last 2.5 years. We're going to get there. And he's got a lot of sensory needs because along with autism can go a lot of things. So anxiety is a big one. Sensory processing disorder is a big one, and ADHD. And he has all three. So we're currently in the quarantine really dealing with a lot of things all at once. Mm-hmm. And I'm lucky enough that she's able to provide us with strategies to help us with all of those things. And she sends us like a schedule we can make for him at home and a token board where if he keeps his body to himself for 2 minutes, he gets a little sticker or a square, and once he gets 10 squares, he gets a piece of chocolate or something like that.
Gotcha.
To reward him for, keeping his hands to himself and not having aggression.
It takes a lot of work on your part too, I can imagine. Yes. You've got two kids, you've got a household, you've got a job, and you also have a podcast, which I do want to talk about. And I want to, you mentioned that when you got the diagnosis of autism, it really wasn't. It was the end of not knowing what it was, but it was the beginning of this whole new journey of getting therapies and getting him what he needs. How did your other family members handle the diagnosis and then the subsequent journey afterwards?
Well, that was a little tough because the family, my husband's family was really understanding and supportive. They didn't quite understand what autism was, but they were very supportive and happy to provide us emotional support in any way they could. My parents did not really believe the diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So that was a little bit frustrating because I would be trying to do strategies that the behavior therapist would tell me to do, and then they would come in and kind of wipe it all out. And it's all well-meaning.
Sure.
But there wasn't that understanding. And I understand, if somebody hasn't had experience with someone with autism or read about it or even worked with somebody who has autism, it's difficult to understand. And a lot of it looks like, oh, well, they're just not listening or they're just being defiant.
Right.
But it really isn't that way. Mm-hmm. So that was difficult. And it was also, and one other part that I don't think you asked was, it was difficult with friends as well.
Right.
Because some of them either didn't believe it or didn't understand it or pretty much said, see you on the other side, because they didn't really know how to interact. It's kind of like if somebody gets a terminal diagnosis or something like that, they felt uncomfortable and didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So it was difficult to connect to people that way. And I'm sorry, I forgot the other question.
No, it was that was basically it and how it's been afterwards. I guess what strategies did you use in those relationships was it kind of easy? I mean, our children are the most important thing you're going to do and get toxic people out of there. You can't necessarily do that with your family. Right. So how did you guys kind of go through that journey after that and getting them on board if they have gotten on board?
Yeah, they're mostly on board at this point. It's been a little over a year since we got the diagnosis. Actually, this month it will be a year. So I tried giving them information to read on autism that I found like specifically for grandparents, but there wasn't the buy-in enough to read it.
Yeah.
So I've really just been giving them bits and pieces of education about autism and what the treatments are and how to interact with somebody who has autism.
Right.
The biggest thing really, though, was what to do when there was aggression or pushback or what they perceived as defiant behavior, what to do when he wasn't listening, because, you know, they use different strategies for me and my brother growing up because we didn't have autism.
Right.
So we didn't need the different therapies.
Right.
But those things do not work for Benji. So there was a lot of yelling or threats or punishment or things like that that do not work for him and will make the behaviors worse or cause a meltdown. So I really had to model it, so show them what to do and also provide them with very detailed instructions verbally as to, if he does this, then you do this. And I know it pains you because it goes against everything you believe you should do as a grandparent.
Right.
But this is really, truly what the effective thing is.
Yeah, that's probably emotionally exhausting to be having to do it for your son and also other relationships. It's probably really hard.
You know, at this point, it is what it is. There are a lot of balls that I'm juggling, but we're somehow making it work. And I'm lucky that my in-laws are supportive, so they've been helpful as well. At least emotionally, they live kind of far away. Sure. And my husband has also helped quite a bit. I honestly, I commend everyone who is a single parent in doing this. It is incredibly difficult, and I'm very grateful to have him.
I know. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess some of your coping in this is a little bit of your podcast. And could you talk to us about that and how that got started and what made you begin?
Yeah. So my husband and I run a podcast called Thriving in the Midst of Chaos. And it's a podcast for parents or family members of children who have special needs. Although we do talk about a few things related to parenting adult children with special needs. And the first 15 episodes and a couple others were my husband and I just with the raw, honest, hopefully humorous stories about everything in life, whether it's outings or being on vacation or being in the car or getting a diagnosis, just like all the nitty-gritty details. And then we started having other guests on, other parents or family members talk about their experience and specifically whether it's self-care, compassion fatigue, or burnout, or managing aggression. And we've also had some professionals come on to talk about things. And the next 2 weeks I'm really excited about because we have somebody talking about adult transition to adulthood. And we also have somebody the following week talking about everything finances related to children with special needs. So
those are
really
two really good topics.
Yeah, and they are chock full of resources. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah, I'm really, really excited. And I mean, we've just got all sorts of people coming on to give all sorts of resources. And that was really my purpose. So I am a very avid podcast listener, and I've been listening for years to parenting podcasts and even some special needs podcasts. But the thing that I didn't really find was the raw, honest experience. And also, you know, these are the most helpful things because there's so many resources out there.
Yeah.
You don't know which ones to go through, which ones are even still existing, which are the right things to lead you in the right direction. And so I decided to start my podcast. I decided last July, and we started in October, I think. And so we've recorded about 50 episodes so far, and 31 are out. And we're really excited because it's a way to offer people support and also helpful, legitimate resources so they don't have to do what we did of search everywhere under the sun.
Absolutely.
For resources. Yeah.
And so is your husband in the neuropsych world as well?
No, he's in the landscaping business.
Ah, there you go.
Well, what happened, if we have a moment, I had a friend who hopefully will be on at some point in the future. Her son was recently diagnosed with autism, and she was supposed to do this with me, but because she's a single parent and works full time with a child who was a stay-at-home child, she had to back out. So I said, "Hey, hubby, guess what you're doing
Hey,
with me?"
co-host.
But it was really nice, and I found it's a nice way to help us cope and a great way to help us bond in our relationship.
I imagine it's pretty therapeutic to kind of sit
Yeah.
down, you know, like I can't remember the last time my husband and I sat down and kind of talked about and digested things. It's just hard to do. So there you go. I like that idea. You just start a podcast with your partner.
Yeah, I wish we had more time during the quarantine,
Yeah.
but our son Benji, there was an 8-day period during the quarantine where he didn't sleep.
Oh.
So one of us is now
ouch.
sleeping with him. So I think I've had a 2-minute conversation total with my husband in the last month. But we're making it work. At least Benji's sleeping now.
Well, I love your resource as your podcast and all the good things you talk about. But do you have any autism specific resources, or even for Alex too, that you'd really like for parents to look at?
Yes, I have a few, and these are all ones that I've used and I highly, highly recommend. So Autism Speaks, especially if you're in the new phases of getting diagnosed, they have a 100 days packet that they will send to you for free or email you for free to help you get through what to do. But they have tons of other resources, which are really, really great, and you can call them anytime to ask them questions. The Autism Society has lots of other good resources and also support groups locally wherever you live, and also events. Rights Law is great for the education piece and knowing what your rights are as a child for your child, and IEPs and everything. And they also have a special education law blog through Rights Law, and it's WRIGHTS. The ARC is national, and I haven't used them as much, but they are really helpful in helping you navigate the special needs and autism world. Parent to Parent USA, I don't know if it's autism specific or just special needs, but they will hook you up with another parent who's been through this journey to help guide you. The Mighty is a good one for all things special needs, but the one that I recently discovered is called A Day in Our Shoes, and that's a website that has everything and anything you could ever possibly want to know about IEPs and school for any child with special needs. And she also has a podcast, which goes into things in a little bit more detail, which is really helpful. And I'm trying to pull it up now.
Yeah. Those are great resources. And
yeah,
I love the idea of a first 100 days for Autism Speaks. I mean, what a clear,
awesome.
Like, you've got a plan. Like, that's...
And it has places to write down all of the doctors and all of the phone calls you've made and the goals and what the test scores were, like everything.
Wow, I love that.
It's really helpful. And the podcast is called Don't IEP Alone. So she's the one that has A Day in Our Shoes website. And if you are not a website person but a listener, that's a good podcast about IEPs.
Okay, great.
And your rights. So it's a great place to start.
And if we want to find your podcast, Thriving in the Midst of Chaos, where can we do that?
Yeah, on any place that people find podcasts. The specific link is FUBAR, FUBARPOD.libsyn.com. We're also on all of social media with our handle Midst of Chaos Pod. And we also have a website, which is www.midstofchaospod.com. And anyone is welcome to email me at fubarpod@gmail.com.
I love that. And if you wouldn't mind, just one last question for us, Jessica.
Sure.
If Benji could have taught you something through this experience that you guys have gone through, what would it be?
Well, I actually have 4 answers. They're quick.
I like it.
Patience, for sure. Understanding humor. Just, he has a different sense of humor, and it's delightful.
Oh.
And it just makes me so happy. Mindfulness, so just kind of being in the moment, which is absolutely necessary, and noticing all the small blessings. So any little thing that he did that was new or reaching his goal was a huge success and really exciting. So that was a big one.
Yeah, that's a gift to have that kind of perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I know Jessica gave you so many good nuggets of information and great resources, and it's just really easy to listen to. So make sure you go check out her podcast. Please follow along with Child Life On Call on Facebook and Instagram if you haven't already. And don't forget that we do have Facebook pages and community groups for child life specialists who are certified and parents to share information. Just search for Child Life On Call on the search bar and you should be able to find us. If not, just get in touch and I'll help direct you to it. If you'd like to share your story or just reach out to me personally, you can get in touch with me at info@childlifepodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening and have a wonderful week.